Let's have a look at the cold steel English backsword and a quick glance at the Red Dragon Armoury 14 gauge buckler. And at the end of that, I'm going to try a different kind of material for test cutting and see how it works out. Here goes. This is the second sword that I bought. I didn't know what company to use, what supplier to use, knew nothing at all really. Stumbled across the Cold Steel website, not knowing that you pay quite a bit for what you get from them. And first of all, I got the, I think they call it hand and a half sword rather than bastard sword. And then I got this. I wasn't sure which I wanted to get, couldn't really decide. Got the hand and a half sword first, then I got this, and then I found out that buying swords can be quite addictive. This is only really here because I was doing a bit of practice with this, and I find it very strange to use a one-handed sword and have nothing at all to do with your other hand. And I think I'll make a quick review of this. I think I'll make it in a separate video because then you can put the item in the title of the video and it's easy for people to find. This, I found a short review of before I bought it. It didn't really say much except that they thought you want to wear a glove because when you have your hand very close to the basket hilt here, then it bruises you a little bit. It could scrape your knuckles, but I've not had that problem. I find that you just got to hold it a little further back. Although, of course, if you were really in the 17th century using these things on the battlefield, you'd probably be wearing pretty thick gloves anyway, so it wouldn't cause much of a problem. I'll fill out the standard sheet like this as I go along, and then if anybody else is wondering about whether or not to buy this, they should be able to find some good information about it. Backswords were common in the 17th century from about halfway through, and until sabres took over, they were very common for your average, apparently, British gentleman. And they were a primary military sidearm for a long time. I like this. It's up until about a year and a half ago, this is the sword I used most and most successfully for test cutting, really just the bottles. It's very well constructed. I do find it's a little bit prone to rust, in particular on the basket, which I believe is stainless steel, don't really know for sure. This is 1055 carbon steel. It's very oily now. I gave it a good covering earlier. Before now, I've left it for a couple of months and found little rust spots. Don't know if I'd like me to let you see it. There's a little there now on the basket. So if you want to keep this in good condition, you're going to have to, just one there, you're going to have to be prepared to take a bit of wire wool to it, maybe 4 times per year. And you may even find, if you don't oil it enough, that you get a little bit of rust or more marks that precede rust. No, you might just see it there a little bit. And I need to work on that with wire wool every now and then, or soon get some rust. One mundane point I'll mention is that the only time I've had any kind of an accident with swords since I've been using them for about 3 years now is with this blade, and it's because of the basket hilt. Using wire wool to clean it up, turned it upside down, it slid out, and like an idiot, when it was falling down, I went to grab it and I caught the blade, and I was millimeters away from probably having to have a hospital visit. It was enough to be worrying. Never do that. Let it fall to the floor, or always handle it by the hilt, and that's really a lesson everybody should learn. Now we have it as 1055 steel. It's a backsword, 17th century. I'm going to need a couple of things to measure it and weigh it. Only be a second. Might seem a little bit hasty in making this. It's because there's not a lot of daylight left and I'd like to get it done. I'm finding, despite best intentions, I just don't have the time I'd like to make videos of any kind. Right, we have 81.2 centimeters on the blade. And we have a total length, let's see, it's 97.5, which I think does agree with the Cold Steel website. Have to have a look later. We really do need a table for this sort of business. Base width, it's not as wide as a lot of arming swords or long swords, but it's fairly wide. But it's a thickness that's really exceptional, I think we'll find. And nice and accurate. 3.53. Just going to have to check that. See, might have expected it to be closer to 4. No. Okay, there you have it. Now then, the base thickness, I'm going to do it at the back because of course it's much thinner towards the front, but I think we want the maximum thickness, and this is pretty thick, I think, for the size of it. And we've got 4.4 millimeters, and this is of some interest because one thing people say about cold steel blades is that they don't have a lot of taper. I've never looked myself. Let's see, halfway. I'm going to have to turn it around. Halfway we've got 3. Actually it gets to 2.9. So 4.4 to 2.9 halfway, and let's go a few centimeters from the end, which is what I usually do, and we've got 2.5. Not sure if I expected that. And the balance point will probably be quite seriously affected by the weight of the basket. And this is tough. I was going to guess, but why not use the gauge? I think that's probably just comes up at 3 millimeters, 2.6. And this is pretty tough. I've mentioned before when looking at, I think it was the Bosworth longsword, I wouldn't expect it to protect against a very heavy blow from a very heavy weapon. This is it would take a hell of a lot to get through this, a great deal indeed. I wouldn't even worry too much if a warhammer was coming in my way, as long as the beak isn't going to go through the basket. And point of balance, that's going to be, I think, about 7. We've got 9 centimeters. Let's check that. Yeah, 9 centimeters. And we've got 1 rear fuller. That's 3/4. and we have one in the centre that's just a bit less than half. Let's call it half. And now let's weigh it. This is of some interest to me because I find it quite hard to handle. As I mentioned, it's a sword I like. It's one of my first. Yesterday I was using the buckler. I've done this before, but not as long. I've mentioned before, I only really get to train in HEMA sometimes once a month. I wish it was more often, but there's so much to do and so little time. You don't want to do this because then you're going to do a lot more movement. You might for thrusting, but apparently most of the time you want your shoulders quite square on as you're cutting around it. And just for a little while, just trying to get the position right, cutting below, cutting above, I found not only do I move the buckler more than you're really supposed to, but I found it really made my arm ache to the point it was quite painful after 15 minutes of it. One thing is quite well known is that you're generally supposed to hold the buckler out quite far. Evidently in some Italian works they suggested otherwise. I draw parallels between that and unarmed martial arts, where although when you're training to familiarise yourself with movements early on, there's a lot of deliberate blocking where you plan to have a movement to block as an attack comes in. We find that when people get in the boxing ring, they just want to cover up all the time, and you have to, because you don't have time to say, there's a punch coming to me, I'm going to do this now. And it's similar. You don't want to stand there, wait for a sword to come at you and then swing this to do something about it. You want that there so it's a constant shield. They've got to work around it, and it gives you a base, a point that you know you can't be attacked through as you're moving, and you will want to maneuver that area of protection and work around it. So it's not really correct to think you've got this and you're fending off attacks in different places. It just doesn't work like that in combat. Enough of the buckler for now. It's because it really makes my arm ache a lot to use it that I am interested in the weight. And let's have a look at that now. I expect it to be more than a kilo. It is, but only a bit, 1.17. Okay. And just for comparison, I'm going to weigh the one of the only other single-handed weapons I have. To make a comparison. Now let me just handle this for a moment. And I want to feel this by comparison. This feels a lot lighter. So if it's not actually lighter, then, and we expect it to be lighter because of the basket, if it's not actually lighter, then it really isn't the balance. Let's see. Wonder if this will just about hook on successfully. I better be careful. Oh, it's going to be close. No, it isn't going to. Okay. Let me see. This should do. What I did there was a little risky on its own, and I wasn't going too far. As soon as I felt it was going to slip. You mustn't mess around with sharp things. Right, let's just reset that. That just gave me 105. Interesting. That is, let me just try that again. Of course, I don't want to put it down too hard and bias it. 1.130. Okay, the difference is absolutely minimal. Less than I thought. 2.130. So it's not just the weight, and I'm just going to, of course, comparing them in different hands, and it tells you so much. I'm manoeuvring strangely because I've got a camera right there and I've got things right behind me. Not that I'm very proficient using the backsword, but probably not quite as bad as I seem. Just want to do some cuts to get a feel. See, that's hard. It's hard work. And let's change over. Of course, although this doesn't have a basket, you can see the difference in the width of the blade. I'm not going to measure this now. I did a review of this some time ago. I'll put that up here, but that was before I was measuring and weighing. I probably will get the statistics on it another time. This is easier. My arm is, I'm at the end of a 5-day weight training program, so I should expect a bit of arm and shoulder soreness, and I did some of this yesterday. It doesn't help. So there's a bit of ache in it anyway, but this feels so much easier than this, although the weight difference is minimal, and that's interesting. I still like this, but unless I had compelling reason to use the basket, and of course there is a compelling reason because it gives you really, really good protection, then I'd probably rather carry around the arming sword. I'll put the price difference between the two weapons on the screen. I can't remember at the moment. This cost me about $340. I've seen it for as little as $269. Maybe it was even $259. And now it's up to just over $300 again. And I'll have a look at notes I made on other weapons, and then I'll arbitrarily assign my score on speed and strength and make a note, and you should see the final results right about here. I think that all that's left is for me to do a little bit of test cutting. Let's see if the light just about lasts to do it now. It might do. Might as well mention the hilt briefly. I understand they call this a mortuary hilt. Somebody who's an expert might say no, that doesn't qualify for some reason or another, and I wondered why. And I read recently that at one point you'd have a design of certain leaders, certain political figures. You have their portrait on the hilt, and that is why they called it a mortuary hilt. So it was some sort of reference to a dead person. I don't know if that's correct or not, and I think we've all learned that you can have information published online that looks authentic that isn't necessarily. It's not. I'm not questioning it. I don't have the knowledge to call it into doubt, but I want to read it elsewhere and see a few other references before I am absolutely certain that's the case. One thing I do notice is seems to be welding here holding this together, and despite what I said earlier, I wonder how strong a blow you could take here that might not separate the two. Still, you've got pretty good hand protection. You do get fuller, thicker baskets, of course, but if something's going to come towards your hand and you're at risk of damage, you'd certainly much rather have this than not. And you add the buckler to it, and you've really got some good protection. Of course, you'd be armoured anyway if you're in the military at this period. And these two don't go together chronologically. They would have at times, but the buckler would have been around for a good couple of hundred years when this became quite common. And as far as I can tell, the backsword was a very common weapon for over 100 years. And sometimes it's interesting to think about that. You think about something like the AK-47. Of course, people see a rifle with a curved magazine and some wooden fittings, and they think it's an AK-47. And that wasn't used all that long, really, and most of what you see will be an AKM or an AK-74. You think of that, it's thought of as an iconic, really, really famous weapon, perhaps more than the Armalite, the M16. Might have to be a bit more expert than me to really know which it should be called. I think it's M16 in the military, at least one version of it was. But they haven't been used for anywhere near as long as something like this, 130 years approximately. We haven't had except for some very early guns that will still be used in certain less advanced, less militarily advanced, less industrialized countries of the world. You don't have a weapon that's a primary weapon in use in the military for 130 years. So I think I should perhaps have checked this. I haven't before making a video, but for the AK-47, I think you're talking about the 50s. No, probably coming on to the 60s. But it's still in, if it's in use now, it's very rare, and it's other weapons that people see they will think is that weapon. So it's far less than 100 years, and it's almost disappeared. And by the time we come around to their point of origin, the same will have happened to the AKM and the AK-74. Just a side note there. Well, let's see if I can do a few cuts before it's too dark. This material I want to do a bit of test cutting on is, of course, Blu-tack. It's really thick and it's really pretty hard. I bought lots of it to make a kind of a something to substitute for a double end ball with when training, and I've used it for hand conditioning. I cut a little bit of it before my old cutting post over there, and I lost half of it in the hedgerow, and it has not been found since. So I'm trying to cut the other way, and I'm pretty sure it won't be able to break a window. Maybe I'll regret that. It's so dark now that I've really had to hurry, and there's not as much room as you'd like to cut this, but I want to get a couple in, and I'm hoping that it's a better indicator of how well a weapon cuts than the standard bottles that I would use. And it saves you buying tatami mats, and you can, when it's in pieces, mold it together. You don't want to just push one end to the other, you want to squeeze it together to make sure it's pretty tough. I'd probably actually push it into a tube or something like that, so later on it will be quite an even test with the same properties from one to another. Right, let's just do a couple. When I tried to cut it before, I was using, I think, the Bosworth longsword, which is pretty sharp, and the first time it just knocked it off. The second time I got a good swing in and it did cut it. It's not easy to cut. Okay, slightly different angle. Usually the bottles I would use will have that angle, and this is higher, but the principle should be the same. But when you miss, you're not going to do much at all. Something that's worth noting there is the weight really took me down towards the end, and that's about 1.5 centimeters into it. As I said earlier, I used to cut a lot with this, haven't recently. I've used two-handed swords more often, and I would like to have one now to try to cut through this with. Got to try to follow through, not at an angle, but nice and straight, and I was clearly at an angle when I hit it before. I'll demonstrate that in a moment. I've really hurried here, and I've not arranged things quite as well as I should. And about the same. I'll have one more and then we'll call it a day, because I need to plan this a bit better, have this further from the tree, and have the camera somewhere else altogether. But then at least I've learned, one, that it's difficult to cut, and two, what not to do next time. Hopefully there's just enough light left to see. There's really not a lot. Here we've got one about 1 centimeter in. Here, maybe 1.5, and next to it, more like 9 millimeters, I think. So what this tells me is this stuff, this thick Blu-tack. Probably hear that. It's not soft. It really isn't when you've got a lot of it. It's tough to cut, and I think it's going to be quite effective. And rather than just slicing a bottle and saying yes, the bottle is now in pieces, you can actually look at the depth as well and get an idea of how well the blade cuts. Because the shed's right here, I didn't swing as hard as I would like to, and because of the position of a few things. So I'll do something about that in the future and find a much better hanging place. I think I'll see if I can just get in a couple of bottles before it's completely dark, just to show that that sword does cut pretty well, and this is tough. It's not just a poor substance. Okay, here goes. There's hardly any light left at all, just enough to do a couple of cuts, just to show that this blade does cut well. I think I've cut with it on camera before, and that the lack of cutting through the entire Blu-tack isn't just because it's so blunt. When you can't find the on switch of the camera, you really know you're trying to film in the dark. Okay, let's see. Me and a friend were having a bit of a contest once, and we got 7 cuts each with this. Probably get 2 or 3 now, which isn't much of an achievement. I see. It cuts pretty well. And that was a little bit too low. 3. Oh, I think that makes the point. It cuts pretty well. It goes straight through it. I've used some other swords. I think in a previous video, maybe the one I put a link to earlier, I may have reviewed this next to the windlass arming sword that I was comparing it with earlier. I think that's the one I was using, and I cut a bit with that, then with this, and I was surprised at how this just slides through it in comparison. One more thing I want to say about the design about this after the cut. Oh, and that slid off. Still, it cut pretty well. It goes straight through it. Should have made this point before. I'm sure that a real backsword of the era would weigh less than this. I think the blade would be thinner. It wouldn't quite reach the 4 and a little bit millimeters of this one, and I don't know if it would have less width this way necessarily, but when I've seen some antique versions for sale, not very cheap, and also broadswords which of the same period are fairly similar, they seem to have a smaller, lighter blade on them, and I think that would make it much easier to handle. Right, I think I'll close it here. I will show a shot of the piece of Blu-tack I cut, just to illustrate its qualities for cutting in the daylight. That's it then. Thanks for watching. This is one of my oldest swords. Wanted to talk about it a bit for a long time. I do like it. It's a bit hard to wield off for a while, but it's a good weapon, and it's pretty solid. If you can get it for closer to 250 rather than over 300, then I think it's worth buying. I've even considered buying a second because I quite like it, and backswords aren't easy to come by, even though it's not all that authentic. I've seen that Hanway do one and they charge $5.50 for it, or at least the supplier does, and that's a bit too much. It's out of the stock at the moment anyway. I've seen somebody else makes a Scottish backsword, and the basket hilt has loads of red felt on it, which just doesn't appeal to me, and you get a similar bastard sword by the same people, and I just don't like the look of that really. There's no particular reason. I'd like to find another make of backsword and see that somebody's done a slightly better job of comparing to the original. That's it then. Thanks for watching. My name's Mark, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.